Hi, I'm Old Norse Specialist Dr. Jackson Crawford. Today on my Patreon-supported channel about Norse language and myth, I want to talk to you about when the Norse discovered America, or really, Canada. Now, what I want to cover in this video is the first 3 sightings of lands in North America other than Greenland by the Norse as recorded in the Icelandic saga called the Saga of Greenlanders, Greenlanders Saga in Old Norse. Let me make 2 major disclaimers before I get started with this though. One is that, as I've mentioned in several of my videos, I am not an archaeologist. I am a philologist. These are both professions. They both require a Ph.D. to teach at a university, but a philologist such as myself approaches the past through texts and language. An archaeologist approaches the past through artifacts, through digs, or through things found by other people in digs. It's a matter of whether you're dealing with the past through physical remnants or linguistic remnants. Now, I'm firmly on that linguistic remnant side, so what I'm going to be talking about in this video is still in my wheelhouse. It's from a saga. For the archaeological evidence for the Norse discovery of America, I'm relying on other people as much as anybody watching this would be. So I would recommend you to check out some of the other sources about that. I'll have a selection of those in Reader's Corner at the end of this video. Now, my second important disclaimer is I am not Canadian. So forgive me if any of my references to Canadian places are somewhat askew or something like that, or I pronounce something in a way that a Canadian would not. Mostly I'll be talking about Newfoundland, which I mostly know about thanks to Leslie the Bird Nerd, my favorite YouTube channel, but that does not equip me much to talk about Newfoundland per se. Most of my experience with Canada is actually Clésmat Tabarnak with Quebec, which doesn't really come into the story. So the Norse were great explorers, we know that. Consider the Kingatorsuaq runestone in Greenland, which is found in northwest Greenland at 72 degrees north. The Arctic Circle is 66 degrees north. They got around. How far they got into North America is a question that has vexed scholars for a long time, since even before the remnants of a Norse settlement were discovered at Lanso Meadow in northern Newfoundland. But that's not exactly what I plan to deal with here. Rather, what I want to deal with is, again, the texts which were written about those explorations. Now, according to 2 different sagas written down in Iceland during the 1200s originally, Greenlandinga Saga, Saga of the Greenlanders, and Eirik Saga Rauða, Saga of Eric the Red, some Greenlanders, or Norsemen on their way to Greenland, stumbled upon parts of North America in the late 900s or early 1000s. Now, these are both being written obviously much later than when these occurred, but the oral transmission of stories in the early medieval period in Norse-speaking lands is well documented. For instance, we have the Poetic Edda, largely poems composed probably during the 900s, but transmitted orally until they were written down in the 1200s. Now, Greenlanders, which was written down a little bit earlier, around AD 1200, has less of the fantasy-like elements that you will find in the Saga of Eric the Red, which was written down around 1280. The Saga of Eric the Red also seems to have rewritten some elements of the story from the perspective of the Saga of the Greenlanders to glorify the family of who else but Eric the Red, probably because the saga is itself written by descendants of Eric the Red. Both sagas mention Skrælingjar, or native people that they encounter in North America. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail about this. They don't really actually describe them a ton of detail. I will mention that of the various propositions for what Skrælingjar means, that I think the most likely is the connection to skroll, which is dry skin, since they talk about them making things such as their boats out of dried skin. It's also interesting to note that there's a verb, skrælna, for grass when grass dries out. So grasset skrælna, the grass is dried up. So that gives you a form very similar to scralling. There is also, oddly enough, in modern Norwegian, an insult word, scralling, which means something like kind of like weakling, wimp. We don't know if that is directly connected to the word as applied to the American Indians that are being encountered. And if it is, if it's being somehow derived from that term, or if it's an independent formulation from the same root. Like these are people that are somehow like dried up skins or something like that. All right, so let's look at the first 3 expeditions mentioned in the Saga of Greenlanders. The Saga of Greenlanders opens when Eric the Red has already begun the Norse settlements in Greenland along its southwest shores. Icelander Bjarni Herjolfsson comes home to Iceland from Norway at the end of one summer to find that his father Herjolfur has moved to Greenland. He departs from southwest Iceland to join him, but in the course of his journey he misses Greenland in fog and keeps sailing southwest for many more days until seeing a land Bjarni knows is not glaciated, mountainous Greenland, right? So he doesn't see glaciers, he doesn't see mountains, so this isn't Greenland. Instead, it is a hilly, forested land, and his men want to look around and maybe resupply from its abundant resources. Bjarni, however, says they have everything they need and orders them to sail on, keeping this land a port as they head back to sea, and sailing another 2 days before sighting another land. This land is slettur, or smooth, flat, and also forested, so he knows this isn't Greenland either. Again, the men want to go ashore for wood and fresh water, but Bjarni says they're amply fixed for both, and he says sail on. Now they sail apparently northeast for 3 days and see another land, quote, high and mountainous and with glaciers. They see that this is an island as they sail along its shore. Not wanting to stop, Bjarni has them sail 4 days, still going northeast, until they do in fact reach Greenland. Now on Greenland, there's great interest in Bjarni's discoveries, and he's criticized by everybody there for being forvitinn, uncurious. In chapter 2, we get the real meat and potatoes of the descriptions of the lands, when Leifur Eriksson, so Leifur, son of Erikr the Red, buys Bjarni's ship and takes a crew of 35 men to retrace Bjarni's steps. So he returns to the 3rd land Bjarni saw first, and he names it Helluland, flat stone land. Then he proceeds to the 2nd land Bjarni saw, and he names that Markland, forest land. Now after a break for a word from my sponsors, I will give you my translation of the description from the Saga of Greenlanders about the 3rd land Leifur saw, the first one Bjarni saw, which is likely to be Newfoundland and Canada. All right, this is from my unpublished translation of chapter 2 of Greenlandinga Saga. Speaking of Leifur and his men. Now they sailed northwest back out to sea, and they were out 2 days before they saw land. And they came to an island that was north of the land, and they went up and looked around in good weather. And they found dew on the grass, and they took the dew in their hands and brought it to their mouths, and they thought they had never tasted anything as sweet as that was. Then they went to their ships, and they sailed into the water that lay between this island and a peninsula that stretched north from the mainland, and then sailed west around the peninsula. Here the sea was very shallow at low tide, and their ship got stuck, and they had to look a long way to see deeper water from their ship. But they were so curious about exploring the new land that they didn't care to wait until the sea rose under their ship again, and they ran to the land where a river flowed into the sea from a lake. And when the sea rose again under their ship, they took the boat and rowed to the ship, and then moved the ship into the river and into the lake. And then they cast anchor and took their hides out of the ship and put up tents. Then they discussed and decided to stay there that winter, and they built big houses. There was no shortage of salmon in the lake or river, and bigger salmon than they'd ever seen before. The quality of the land there was so good that they thought there would be no need to store up winter fodder for the livestock there. There was no frost in the winter, and the plants barely withered. The length of days was more even than in Greenland or Iceland. On the shortest day of the year, the sun was visible at both Uktarstaðr and Dagmálastaðr, so that means right about 3 hours after and about 3 hours before noon. This actually limits the latitude at which this location could be. I'll show you in a map there roughly what this could mean. This seems to me, looking at a map, to be quite possibly somewhere around Big Brook, Newfoundland. But again, I'm not Canadian, so Canadians, welcome to opine about that separately. Now that's the most comprehensive and compelling description of this new land that we find. But there's another interesting thing about this expedition in Chapter 3. When they've been camping there over the winter, the guy who's part of Leivor's team, named Tyrkir, who is a, quote, man of the South and a longtime companion of Leivor's father, Eric the Red, returns excitedly to camp babbling Othitsku, or in German. When they get him to talk Old Norrönu in Old Norse, he says he's found grapes and he's sure that that's what they are. He explains that he grew up among vineyards. Wherever he is from in the south is apparently, southern Germany or something. When they return to Greenland after their winter there, in this new land, it is with a ship full of grapes and a glowing report about a land that Leivor names Vínland, Wineland, because of the grapes. Now, after Leivor returns to Greenland, his brother Thorvaldur goes on Leivor's ship to Vínland with a crew of 30 men, and they stay a few years, as opposed to just over one winter. During their second summer, Thorvaldur finds a spot where he wants to site his permanent farm. This is really good land. They do intend to stay. But this is where they come upon 3 overturned, hide-covered boats, quote, with 3 men sleeping under each. They kill 8 of them, but the 9th one escapes toward what looks like settlements further up the, quote, fjord from them. Soon they're attacked by a large group of men in these skin boats, and Thorvaldur himself is killed by an arrow. The other men return to their base camp further north, and then they spend the winter loading up on grapes before they return to Greenland in the spring. Now there are subsequent expeditions into Vínland, deeper into the interior, with more encounters with Skrællingar recorded in both the Saga of Greenlanders and the Saga of Eric the Red. But these first 3, mentioned in the more realistic Saga of the Greenlanders, probably offer the most compelling description and the best possibility of gathering evidence for where exactly Vínland really is. We know they got as far as at least Landsø, the very northern tip of Newfoundland. This seems to suggest they went a good bit further south. In future videos, I may return to look at some more of these expeditions, maybe a little bit more at the Saga of Eric the Red as distinct from the Saga of the Greenlanders. But for now, I hope this has been an interesting or informative look at this question for you. I hope you'll check out my hundreds of videos about subjects in Norse language and myth of all kinds on my video channel on YouTube and Vimeo. I hope you'll consider supporting me on Patreon to help me continue doing these videos in beautiful places, my Rocky Mountain homeland in Wyoming and Colorado, for free. And I hope you'll check out my published translations of Old Norse works, such as The Wanderer's Hávamál, which contains both my English translation of that wonderful Old Norse text as well as the original Old Norse. For now, from beautiful Colorado, let me wish you all the best and good health. The whole point of this video channel, the whole point of my books, is to bring good information about these subjects to the people who want it in the places where they're looking for it online. Otherwise, the people who know what they're talking about are all trying to impress each other, talking to each other in the ivory tower, and they're never reaching out to the public. The people who are reaching out to the public on YouTube or wherever else mostly are scared, angry people trying to spread centuries-old, cartoonish racialist theories and crazy mysticism that has nothing to do with our medieval sources. I want to bring good information about our real medieval sources straight to you in the places where you're looking for it, without an agenda, without trying to set myself up as some ivory tower super genius who's better than you. You can help me do that by donating small monthly amounts on my Patreon. And everyone who does that has my everlasting thanks for your incredible generosity and the way that you help me make a university of my favorite place in the world, the Great Rocky Mountain Outdoors. Well, from now, from the middle of beautiful Colorado, let me wish you good thinking, good skepticism, and all the very best.